Now I want to talk with you about shame from my perspective as a 48-year-old. Now, you studied and worked with shame a little bit. I don't remember if you did any work with John Bradshaw. I know you worked a little bit with Robert Bly, but not touching much on shame. So your exposure of shame is mostly through the Lazarus material. And I know that you worked with all of those tapes, the infants, the preverbal shame, the infancy or the child shame, the adolescent shame, and the adult shame. And I'm not sure if any of that had an impact or not. I know it gave you a rough understanding of the territory, but most of my understanding of shame has been visceral over the last decade. For better or for worse, I've been successful at navigating around shame most of the time. But in the visceral experience of a crippling level of shame, a freezing level of shame over the last 10 years, I have a better understanding on a mechanical level of what shame is, and I want to explain that to you. So let's kind of position shame here and then look at some of the various vectors that lead toward it. So the first vector of shame is of having one's identity dishonored. So we each have a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that the I, that the ego, defines itself by, attaches itself to, says, I am this thought, this feeling, this way of being. We have identity, and our I attaches itself, identifies with the pattern. And that's our identity. Now, if we define ourselves as a poet, and we write poetry, that's the identity of a poet, right? You have to write some poems, and maybe you relate to the world in a certain way, but certainly you write poems. And perhaps you attempt to publish the poems, or you attempt to read the poems. Now, if you read the poems, if you express your identity as a poet, and the world dishonors, disregards the identity, there will be a certain amount of cult or cultural shame. Meaning you're doing your role in your script, but other people are doing their role in their script. Now, in this way, there is an attunement crisis, right? If you try to be a poet in the middle of the freeway, in rush hour on the way to work, you aren't getting it. Now, the one that feels shame is the minority. So what I mean is if you try to read poetry in the middle of a freeway as thousands of cars go by, the cars and the people going by will generally not feel shame unless they are threatened by the identity that you're presenting. You will feel shame because your identity, your pattern, in this case your image, is threatened by the fact that no one is responding, right? And so when you put forth a pattern that no one honors, that no one responds to, there is a sense of loneliness, there's a sense of smallness, There's a sense of vulnerability, and there's a certain sense of shame. That the pattern that I put forth was not honored. Right? Now, this is a complex recipe of shame because you are not seeing where they are at if you expect to be honored by people unable or unwilling to honor you. In other words, if you're a black person in a racist cult that pretends to be a meritocracy or has some elements of a meritocracy, but is primarily racist, and you are the best player, you're the most competent, the racism is going to trump the meritocracy. We're basically racist, but we aspire, or maybe within our race, maybe we're basically racist, then we're basically nepotist. But after those criteria have been set, if there's any variation amongst our children, we're nepotists, but amongst our children, if one of them is better than the other, we'll let them have the position, the unfair advantage, right? We're basically racist, but within our race, right? Okay, as long as they're all, okay, you're all white, okay, so then who's the best of the whites, right? Now, if you don't see that, you are dishonoring. You're not recognizing, you're not grasping the pattern of racism and nepotism. But that is the pattern. And you are a small part of a large, in relationship with a large part, right? So you don't grasp that the professions of Christianity, that the professions of fairness and goodwill and all humans are created equal and everyone is created by God. You don't grasp that the racism and the nepotism trumps God, right? These are not real devotees, right? The Christianity is just a veneer thrown on top of racism and nepotism and bigotry, right? Our God is better than everyone else's God, and hypocrisy, right? Right? If I want to rape the slave, if I want to, covet my neighbor's wife as a priest or whatever, that's more important, right? But the Christianity is a veneer. If you don't understand the building blocks of the cult that you're in, right? You've got racism, number one. You've got kind of the sociopathic power element. You've got pride and nepotism, right? And then you've got the defense of these things, which is the veneer. If you don't understand that the Christianity is a veneer to protect and obscure, because most people will not say that we hate people who are different than us, that we will promote incompetence at the expense of other people, but that you should all cooperate with that. In other words, there's benefit in deceiving, right? Let's say may God bless who wins. Meanwhile, I'm bribing and doing all these things to make sure I win, but may God bless who wins is supposed to obscure the corrupt ways that I've obtained power, right? So it's just a veneer. That's an evident pattern. If you spend time, if you see, if you get to know the people in your cult, you will understand the structure, the architecture of decision-making, because it's right in front of you. All people are created equal. here's a stronger, more competent black person, but we're going to pick a less competent, weaker white person and give them the job. What does that say, right? It says there's a set of words, and then there's a function of racism, right? And the words, of course, say that we always tell the truth, thou shalt not lie, that shall. But if you're lying, obviously you're going to lie about lying. Now, as someone that doesn't lie, you've never lied to a friend. You've never lied to a partner. It's obvious that in a more beautiful world, truth is more efficient than deception. In other words, a world of deception consumes about 50% of the energy in uncertainty. Here's what I mean. If you're trying to find someone, right? Let's say you're trying to connect with a woman, and she says she's over here because she doesn't want to be found, right? And you have enough gas in your car to drive over there and drive back. But if you understand that you're in a world of deception, you also have to account, well, what if I arrive there and she's not there? Statistically speaking, in a deceptive cult, people are not where they say they are. So you go meet them mentally, emotionally, physically, and they're not there. Now, you either have to give up on the relationship and write the relationship and the interaction off as a loss. Like, I spent all this time, all this effort, all this interest going over here, and the person isn't there. Meaning they believed, when people hide where they are, they believe that you are trying to hurt them. And so they obscure their location, having been hurt many times in the past, so that they will not be hurt if you go where they say they will be, right? I'm sure I'll meet you there. I'll meet you there, right? What are they saying? I don't want to go there, but I don't want you to come to my house. So, let's pretend that I'm going. Oh, I've got to go, right? So you don't lie, right? And so you spend energy looking around where people say that they are, even when it's obvious that they're not there. You understand the efficiency, the beauty of truth. Like, if people just said where they were and worked with that, that would be so incredible. But you exist in a sociopathic cult, which means that a good percentage of the time, the larger energy is feeding on the smaller energy in a might makes right protocol. Right? Now, it's wrong when compared with a world where everyone tells the truth and responds to that truth with sincerity. It's wrong what's going on, because 50% of human energy is built constructing lies, maintaining the lies, and hunting for reality within the lies. Right? It's like if you create a veil, right, and anyone who wants to interact has to do that through the veil. 50% of all human energy is spent constructing the veil and trying to penetrate the veil. Now, that energy could be spent, of course, meeting every human being's need for survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, self-development, co-creation of abundance, and being part of something more than themselves. right? Abundance is right around the corner. Now, that's also part of your shame. It's one of the bigger sources of shame because you know that. And you believe that other people know that. You believe that other people will do the right thing if they can see it. And you believe that they can see it. But they do not see it. In many ways, will not see it. In many ways, cannot see it. They do not see it. They cannot see it. They will not see it. So there's a whole different set of protocols within the reptilian, sociopathic power structure. You can look at the 48 Laws of Power, a book I'm skimming today, as a way of understanding the reptilian operating system that exists within animals, right? Human beings are emerging out of animals, right? A human being is different because they have a different operating system. It's not the body that separates human beings, right? You have the first separation is rationality, consciousness, and language. But at that just point, you're a very smart snake. You're a very smart reptile. You have a reptilian brain with the capacity to outwit predators and conquer and dominate the planet and other people. You are a rational reptile. The most dangerous sociopath on the planet is a rational reptile. Now, that rationality is a step out of animals because most animals do not have a rational brain. But it is not human. You can be the smartest, the richest reptile without having any empathy, without feeling anything. You can be an incredibly rational reptile. And most of the cult is organized on a rational reptilian platform. It's called enlightened self-interest. Now, if you venture beyond that into humanity and trust in the humanity of human beings that are primarily rational reptile, still animals, you will be alone. You will be betrayed. Your hope, your belief will be broken because you did not see them. They may not see you, but you didn't see them. You didn't understand their hate, their jealousy, their rage, their despair, their mask, their protection, their grief, their helplessness, their despair. You didn't understand and see any of that. And they didn't understand and see you. So there's a disconnect, right? There's a disconnect. But when there is a disconnect, when King Lear arrives in a different play and begins saying his lines, and the rest of the actors do their play, Romeo and Juliet, right? When King Lear arrives in Romeo and Juliet, or when Romeo and Juliet arrive in King Lear, they say their lines, the rest of the actors say their lines. There is a disconnect. When there is a disconnect, the minority, King Lear in Romeo and Juliet, or Juliet, Romeo and Juliet in King Lear. As nobody integrates and associates with the threads of your identity, you will be alone. And that ostracization, that alienation, that dissociation is shame. It is a reminder, it is a bell that's saying you're getting close to the edge of where this body of energy is able and willing to relate to you. When you say, please come here, what is the shame of a lover? Please meet me here. I need you. I want you. I prioritize you. Meet me here. When they say, no, I will not meet you there, through their action, through not acknowledging the call, there is shame. There is shame. But the shame is felt by the individual in a dissociated environment. Now, this is very important to understand for you because you're focusing on resonance. You're focusing on possibility, on beauty. You're saying that your way is more fun. Yes, I'm in a world where this is the script and that is the script and that is the script and it's all functioning as a cog in a wheel. Yes, but this is so much more fun. How would you like to come and play in my play? Wouldn't you like that, right? Over in my play, the lines are different. The lines are more efficient. The protocols are more effective, right? But this is something you really need to understand. 95% of the cult is severely traumatized. Now, they're functioning in a machine over here, and you're stating that there's a better machine over here. They're going to need to go through uncertainty, chaos, and the unknown, and being out of control as they transition from where they are to where you invite them. Now, 95% of the population that has been traumatized repeatedly will prefer discomfort or predictable boredom or predictable pain to making that transition. They're not going to come, in other words. You see the light, the possibility, they will not come. Because what you do not see as a traumatically illiterate member of a traumatically illiterate cult is that many people have been hurt, have been traumatized at least as much as you have. And they have not experienced the success that you have had in the unknown. They've experienced manipulation, failure, betrayal after betrayal after betrayal as they enter the unknown in a state which they cannot control. No one can control the unknown, so it is a function of trust. Now, you know that the rare people that make it through that fear and join you in another way, you know the statistics of success, the statistics of joy, the statistics of enthusiasm. You understand that. But those are in the top 1% of courageous people. You understand that. They do not. The majority does not. As they reject you in order to stay present with the majority, you will feel shame that your reality, that the identity that you attach to, is not believed, is not trusted, is not understood, is not empathized with, is not attuned to. In other words, when you are dissociated, you are not loved. To be unloved begins with dissociation. When you dissociate, you do not see. You do not take time to see. You do not see enough to understand. You do not understand enough to empathize. And you do not empathize with enough to attune. This is a crisis. Right? This is a crisis. So, you will accumulate shame and not understand it as a majority of people reject your invitations a majority of the time and choose not to believe in their own reality in those worlds. Choose not to believe in their own reality in those worlds and in your reality in that world. This is a diminishing experience to extend an invitation into a reality that no one believes in. Right? You can think of it religiously. If you go proselytizing a religion and people slam the door in your face and tell you you're full of shit, but to you it's the most amazing thing. So this is the first thing that I want you to understand about shame. But I also want you to understand something else. The majority is always incorrect. And I'll explain it like this. If you look at the status quo, let's take something simple like cell phone adoption. So right now, as we speak, the majority of people in the world are using cell phones. So they're there. Now, there is a minority of people that cannot afford a cell phone, that hasn't heard of a cell phone, that doesn't have any electricity to charge a cell phone, etc. There's a minority of people that lag behind. But as we speak, there is also a minority of people that has a better cell phone than anything that exists today, that can do better things, that is more reliable. And if it hasn't been invented already, soon there will be a better technology, right? Maybe it's Neuralink. Maybe it's Wi-Fi contact lenses. It will be better, right? The next thing that in 10 years will be adopted by the majority, the next thing right now is occupied by a very small minority of people. The best thing, the best technology of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being is always occupied by a very small minority. And the majority doesn't understand it, can't afford it, don't know they want it, will reject it, know nothing about it, and will not make the leap initially. It is a bell curve of innovation and adaptation. If you are in a minority position, you are in one of two positions. You are either lagging behind the majority, or you are ahead of the majority. Now, an ordinary person cannot tell the difference. You have to evaluate in each of the areas where you are unique, where you are an entity of one, an identity of one. You have to assess whether you are ahead of the crowd or behind the crowd, number one. But that's not enough. You have to, because being part of a network of one, having the best protocol, just imagine you're the best lover in the world. By doing things that no one knows how to do, it's useless if no one knows how to do it, right? It becomes useful if 2 or 3 people who you're lovers with know how to do it with you, then it becomes useful. So you have to evaluate 2 things. Are you ahead or are you behind? Is the reason that nobody gets you because you are lagging behind the majority? You haven't gotten it, right? And it's important to understand that there's both. And here's why. We've spent a decade in frustration and confusion. Why? Why? Because we didn't get it. We didn't get it. We didn't get the importance of the network effect. We just got the importance of the technological efficiency. We knew this was a better way of speaking, but we didn't understand that if nobody speaks that way, it is a worse way of speaking, right? To speak Zulu in a country that speaks English is a worse way of speaking, even if it's a superior language. You didn't get that there is tremendous value in the network effect, right? Facebook, a terrible operating system, but a powerful network, right? LinkedIn, an okay operating system, crappy in many ways, but an incredibly valuable network. You didn't get how important the network is. And the other thing that you haven't fully grasped is that people follow people who have been successful into the unknown more than they follow unknown people into better technologies, right? In other words, the path to diverge from the known, that a majority that is frightened of the unknown is willing to follow, is through the known, not bypassing it, right? So much of our life, we've bypassed the known, right? We left high school to design a better homeschooling program. We bypassed college, a waste of time, and read 700 books and took actions, right? But as we repeatedly go around the known, right, we knew that money was not all that useful relative to other technologies for well-being, right? But other people do not know that, right? And so we are a risky bet for the vast amount of people that can only measure 2 things. This is an unusual person doing an unusual thing, and I don't know where it's going. Right? Now, you have complained at different points that only a very small percentage of people appreciate what we do. That's for this reason. A very small percentage of people, less than 1%, have the competency to grasp the design quality in the areas that we have been interested in, right? So I have spent an enormous amount of time bitching that incompetent people who lack the competence to evaluate the design are pushing the design aside. That's where I'm incompetent, right? Meaning, if I can't understand and relate to the technology that is, which has a big red flashing light anytime you diverge from the norm, that's the main light that members of the cult are using to guide their behavior. Is it normal? Is it not normal? That's it, right? Is it normal? Is it not normal? And normal has a bandwidth, and you're offering to take people outside the norm, outside the norm, outside the norm, while failing to grasp the intelligence of staying within the network, staying within the normal protocol, right? So I've ended up isolated and alone, unable to realize the benefits of any of these designs, because the network effect exponentially amplifies the benefits, right? You can think of like Henry Ford's iteration of the assembly line. Well, what if there's only one person working on the assembly line? It's not a better technique. You need a few hundred people working on an assembly line that know what they're doing, and then you see the brilliance of the factory. As car prices in the time of Henry Ford Sr. descended from the $3,000 that they were as car companies first created cars. As the price descended from $3,000, $3,500 down to $1,700, down to $800, down to $400, as Henry Ford used the assembly line and standardization to bring the price of a vehicle down to $158. And revolutionized transportation. That's when, Henry Ford was sued multiple times by his shareholders for lowering prices too much, for paying over the standard amount of wages, right? But he didn't bypass the dollar. He didn't bypass free market capitalism. He went through it. Right? Now, much of the time, we have not gone through it for a variety of reasons, right? That has benefits, right? Not as much wasted time, not as much boredom, not as much frustration, not as much depression. But there's also, right, we haven't built a track record within the system, right? People look at their measuring points. Do you have millions of dollars? Now, if you have millions of dollars and you're saying that you can help people save money or something like that, they'll be more likely to believe it, right? And so it's important to understand in this shame dynamic that we do not understand other people as much as other people do not understand us. That's where the disconnect lies, right? Now, if we are not smart enough to understand where other people are at and meet them there, if we are not smart enough to grasp the network effect, then our brilliance in design is wasted by us, not other people. Right? So this is something that I'm grappling with now, because it is depressing to think of so much opportunity just dying with me. And it can. There are probabilities in which all of our wonderful ideas die with us, with very little realization. I find that frustrating. And so I'm beginning to work with this. But I want you to understand that it is a shameful, there is an emotion of shame that comes with being invisible again and again and again. And that is highlighted when so much of your spirit, so much of your love is in the design. You love people, Dane. And so you create a more efficient way of doing things, a more beautiful way of doing things, and you experience it. You try it with this person. It's so exciting. And you want that to go out. You want other people to experience the same thing, right? But 1% of the population can come to you. If you want to go beyond that limit, you must go to them. Right? And it's no good saying that they can't get you. They should get you, right? You can't get them. You should get them, right? And that is something that I can just say from my part, I cannot say what you should do or what you will do. What I can say is that there are benefits and costs to either side, that this will be a recurring theme, perhaps for the rest of my life, I cannot tell, but certainly by age 48, it is frustrating how many possibilities are stillborn because I lack the willingness and ability to go to them, to take the time to walk them through the gorge, right, to safety on the other side, because it seems so obvious. That's one source of shame, is not being seen, not being honored, not being recognized. Rejection, the humiliation of rejection, right? I think this would be a neat thing to do, right? So we're back, so we've got, I'm reading these lines, other people are reading these other lines. That's one type of dynamic. But with that also comes the humiliation of rejection. Now this ties in very deeply to early childhood trauma. Now, at your age, right, you have not grasped the intensity of the pain, of the humiliation, of the worthlessness that was given to you by mother. You haven't grasped it yet. Through microdosing psychedelic mushrooms, microdosing, 275 milligrams to 500 milligrams of a powdered mushroom taken in capsule form. Now those are just, particular Psilocybus cubensis variety. There are more potent varieties, so don't mess around. Learn the territory there. Now, my insights into what it's like to be a helpless infant in the care of a narcissistic, largely sociopathic, self-absorbed mother. It is a horrific experience. We went through that experience, and it's in your body and it's in your body language. There is a deep part of us in our body that expects to be unloved, rejected, and valueless. Now, you've developed the ability to speak, to see, to imagine, and to grasp and measure competence. So you know, based on results, that you are good at doing X, Y, and Z. Bravo. You also know what constitutes abusive relationships in many ways, and you're able to largely navigate that. But here's what you cannot do, and I have not learned how to do it either. But it is one of the biggest barricades that we must figure out how to transcend, to transform, to work through if we're going to have a chance. And it's this. Every 3-year-old, every 1- and 2-year-old that is dissociated from, is hated, is unloved, is traumatized, is humiliated by their mother, internalizes the criticism. So a healthy person, I, at my age, look at the cult and look at the mother, and I ask, why does every dysfunctional parent have the right to take care of the innocence of a child just because they have a pussy? Why? Is that really the criteria for measuring parental competence? What kind of a fucked up cult gives an abuse survivor the right to pass on all of that abuse just because they can be fucked? This is sociopathic. This is cruel. This is absurd. It's a low level of intelligence. And it is our cult's level of intelligence. It is shameful. It is disgusting. And we do it every fucking day. Now that's a criticism of the cult. Right? A cult is just a group of people that do stupid things in a predictable way, even though the outcomes aren't very good in many cases. Even though anyone with half a brain could figure out there are better ways of doing it, and we're not doing it, right? Right? You look at an abuse survivor and say you couldn't figure out that horrific experience in childhood was likely to repeat, right? It's the problem with being dumb. Dumb people are too dumb to understand that they're dumb. And that gets given to a child with tremendous cruelty, right? So an adolescent, angry at the hurt, at the helplessness, at the unfairness, at the hypocrisy, the sheer cruelty and abuse of power of a giant in response to an infant. An adolescent can be angry about that and blame, right? Fucked up cult, fucked up parents, right? But moving from there to adulthood is a journey that is foggy in a cult of children in grown-up bodies. So, adulthood is not automatic, right? It takes courage to recognize the cruelty and stupidity of one's cult. But here's the thing to understand. You and I lived the life of that 1- and 2-year-old child. We lived it. The helplessness, the terror, the fucking terror, waiting to be hit, unable to escape, completely dependent. That shame goes in. All of that criticism that a healthy adolescent would direct out there goes in. I'm a bad person. I'm worthless. I won't be loved. It's all my fault. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be me. I'm bad. I'm wrong. I'm worthless. I don't want to be hit. I'm waiting to be hit. I can't get away. That terror is in our body. It's not in the mind. It's an absurd supposition, right? You and I are smart enough. You look at that, you say, worthless, my ass. Right? Incompetent, deserving, fuck that. But here's what you don't know. PTSD is not in the mind. It's in the body. And a cult that doesn't want to deal with the past, that doesn't want to deal with the present in any aspect of its stupidity. You go to your local government and try to get an interview or talk about this, it does not want to deal with it. You try and approach a parent who's abusing their child, they don't want to hear it. Right? Dysfunctional cults behave dysfunctionally. Right? But that goes in to the child and goes into the body, and you don't know it. You don't understand that it doesn't matter. You can read or write 100 books, and it's not going to change. Now, your fucked up therapists don't know this either. It's a pity, right? But where did those therapists come from? The same traumatically illiterate cult as your parents and as you came from, right? People will do almost anything to avoid remembering and grasping the helplessness, the trauma, the grief, the terror of infancy. In a sociopathic environment, right? Even if it's sociopathic only 5%, that's enough to let the infant know it could happen again at any point. Right? That's in your body. It's in my body. Now, I haven't figured out a way to deal with it, and I haven't figured out a way to trust people enough to help me to deal with it. And when I attempted, I was re-traumatized, molested by a therapist. Right? So this is a cultural equation. It's not yours, by the way. Right? You were born in. This very tricky equation was dumped into your body. And like, 500 million other people, you're left to try and figure out what to do with it in a world where the primary protocol is let's not talk about it, right? So that's a pretty dumb protocol. It fails a lot. And so most people in this cult are failing to address their own trauma and abuse and to protect the next generation from the same. A majority of people following a recipe of traumatic illiteracy are failing, not surprising, not because they're bad, fundamentally wrong people, but because traumatic illiteracy doesn't lead to succeeding at one of the most difficult biological riddles the human being will ever face as a species. You feel worthless in your body, and your body will communicate that worthlessness to other people. And it turns out, particularly in a culture that isn't that great at critical thinking and is very good at following the majority, it turns out that mental acuity is not enough to help most people make the bridge from following the body cues to following the mental cues, right? Right. So you have had and will have relationships, depending on what age, with older, smart, kind, psychologically literate women in their 50s and 60s. Good job, by the way. Right? And they will be able to break free of the biological cues and follow you and appreciate, some of the statistical research you've done in relationships. Not a majority. 99% of the people are going to pick up on that 1- and 2-year-old that's in your body waiting to be hit and feeling terrified. And they're going to dissociate from you in the same way they dissociate from their own inner traumatized infant. That is the cruelty of a human being trapped in the reptilian brain through trauma that is intergenerational. It's not your fault, but unless you get to work on one of the most difficult engineering riddles that our cult has to deal with, it will take you down. No amount of money, no amount of sex, no amount of dopamine, no amount of media distraction, no amount of addictive diversions will protect you from going down because you followed the cult in its blindness to trauma. Now, I understand it's hard. I learned about trauma from a stranger in a cafe. I'd heard the words, but no one had ever explained it to me. Right? So a stranger in a cafe is destined to liberate you if you don't listen to this recording before and do something about it. But that's the doorway in, right? You need to learn to honor that terrified infant and respond. Mastering the art of being an adult in a culture that doesn't have many of them. Right? So Marion Woodman, Robert Bly, John Bradshaw. We have a few hints of adults out there. Thich Nhat Hanh. We have a few hints of adults there. But you're going to have to learn to internalize that rather than simply complain that they're not good enough adults, which they are not, right? No adult is good enough to help you reparent your child. And it's important to understand that the alienation that you feel is going to be coming from people reading your body more than your mental architecture. In other words, they will reject you from a body because of a body that you're not paying much attention to, and they will not see the mind that you're focused on, and that they either do not grasp or are unwilling to follow. This is a source of shame. Now, when you spend more love, more effort, more energy than most people to develop in areas that most people sell out, betray, there is a message that the identities that you're developing are not as valuable as a power identity, as a money identity, etc. And that will hurt. And when people turn away from that hurt and turn away from you because you are hurt, there will be the shame of the original identity and then the subsequent shaming of the hurt identity. Shame is about dissociation. And when you are traumatized by a larger pattern of energy that is not right, but has might, at a sociopathic level, might is right. The victors write the history books and tell the stories by the right of power. Their ability and willingness to dictate, to dominate, affords them the right to do so, the right of domination. Now, it doesn't matter that domination is inferior to empathy as an operating system statistically. It's when a sociopath and an empath go to war, first of all, they're on sociopathic they're in sociopathic territory. And if the empath cannot understand that they're dealing with a reptile, but instead looks for the human being or the human behavior in the reptile, they go down, right? An empath opens their arms, but if they were too dumb to grasp that they're dealing with a sociopath, it just provides a doorway for the knife. Now, this is territory you need to start dealing with before you can realize our potential as a grown-up, let alone an adult, right? It's painful territory. It's difficult territory. Right? And I'm still dealing with it in a variety of dysfunctional ways and in some functional ways. So what are the functional ways? Becoming trauma literate takes about 500 hours of reading and analysis and writing, etc. Doing meditation at least once a day. Reparenting the inner child regularly, letting new waves of terror and shame come up and loving those new waves. It's not a finished process. So that work has to be redone that you did so well when you were a teenager. Having enough of a routine, creating, stability in the environment, minimizing negativity that has nothing to do with us. Just stop watching the news. You and I have never done one thing, once, that was useful for us or the planet in response to the news. In other words, it wasn't our news. It's just blood and guts from around the planet cobbled together to sell advertising and on the part of a business. Right? News is something that affects your well-being that you're able and willing to respond to. That's useful information. The rest, if you can't respond to it or won't, it is a distraction. And if you want to listen to the world's latest disasters and send money every time you listen to the news, that's great. You're responding to it. But unless you're willing to take at least one action other than telling your neighbors, isn't the world a terrible place, it's completely destructive. So join me. We cut out watching the news some years ago in favor of selecting media that we could do something about, learning from books, etc. It's a better approach. But build competence around trauma, around articulation of trauma, find supports. Like biodanza right now is a good expression of some sense of community. So, I do a weekly biodanza at the moment. Making videos like these, it's grounding and helps me integrate and learn, because in a culture like ours, there aren't many people to have this in-depth of a conversation with. I do not have a single person that I can call and say, let me talk about the things I'd like my younger self to know, and you talk about the things you'd like your younger self to know. Let's have a picnic for 3 or 4 hours. I don't have that in this culture. Right? But that also moves in the direction, of a vision I have for community, which I'm developing. In summary, shame is in your body. It will come in levels. It's horrifically difficult to feel. It comes from being separate. As much as you criticize the world for not getting it, for not supporting you, blah, 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 that's all true. But when you're done with that, look at the ways that you don't get and you don't understand the world. Why are people so unconscious? Right? It's not hard to understand. Right? Every time they tried to express something unique and, it was squashed, it was humiliated. So now they've gone numb in that area, right? And then there's been no cultural force that says, welcome back to the world as an unusual individual, right? So understand that we're part of a young culture, a very young culture, right? An immature culture, an unsophisticated culture, with areas of brilliant competency and areas of mass stupidity. If you understand that, you're part of that experiment, you're part of that framework, and gamifying a little bit more of it, looking at what you can do, understanding that you're a small mass of energy in relationship to some very large objects. You do not win in a head-on collision with a large object that has a denser mass than you have. If you fight the culture, it is 1 billion times stronger than you and bigger than you. Don't do it. If you fight with a group, don't waste your time. Instead, use your energy to work around. Understand the masses of energy you're dealing with. Right? Understand that they have a beneficial and a problematic purpose. You have to understand both. Culture is necessary. Blind stupidity is a necessary default starting point. Every infant gives blind stupidity to their cult. They start eating the things their cults eat, even if it makes them fat and dysfunctional. They start saying and thinking the way their cult thinks, even if it makes them unhappy. That's the starting point. You need a uniformity. You need a language, you need shared protocols. Everyone needs that to start, right? And so as you work around the edges, right, and transformation and iteration, etc., look as much inward and just understand that as hard as it is for you to make sense of the cult, that is as hard as it is for the cult to make sense of you. Right? So don't bypass, do take the time. It has been useful to criticize every element of the cult, because then you can at least recognize what you're dealing with. Don't be all positive and say, isn't it wonderful and it's all working for the best? Well, if the best is another raped infant, then, well, who needs the best? Look at what's dysfunctional. Look at what can easily be improved 10 times. But also understand that until people have security of survival, their greatest fear will be the unknown, and many do not and will not ever have security of survival in this cult. Thank you for watching, Dane, and it's a pleasure to make these videos for you.